Hello Mitchells and Butlers. Welcome to the Penfolds Training on Canunga Hill. My name's Jamie Sash. I'm the Global Brand Ambassador for Penfolds. Very pleased to be able to present these wines to you today. The first one that you'll be looking at is the 2013 vintage of Penfolds Autumn Riesling. A wine with a long and proud history. Riesling was planted in South Australia possibly more than 100 years ago. Of course, South Australia was settled by many German migrants as far back as the 1860s. Many of them brought Riesling cuttings with them and established vineyards in South Australia. Penfolds started taking this varietal quite seriously in the 1970s, and in 1971 bottled what was known as the first Autumn Riesling. In those days it contained a little bit of Traminer, and in fact so does the current vintage of Penfolds Autumn Riesling. In fact, the 2013 that you have has 6% Gewürztraminer in the blend. That's adding just a little bit of aromatic spice to the Riesling varietal. The fruit is grown from Eden Valley, which is a cool climate district not far from where I am here at the spiritual home of Penfolds at McGill. Eden Valley is part of the Mount Lofty Ranges, and due to the elevation we get long, slow ripening of the grapes from the vineyards in Eden Valley. So typically we see a lot of beautiful lemon-like characters coming through, perhaps some blossom, and that Traminer just adding a little bit of interest and spice and weight to the palate of the wine. Riesling is very reflective of the soils or terroir of where the grapes are grown. We find Eden Valley, with the long, slow ripening and ancient soils that we have there, provides the perfect setting for growing this particular grape varietal. Of course, Rieslings drink very well when they're young and fresh and vibrant, but they also have a tremendous ability to age gracefully with the passage of time. Perhaps one of the great age-worthy white grape varietals. Typically, as it gets older, the citrus changes from that lovely lemon zesty character of its youth into something more akin to lemon curd, and perhaps with further passage of time into oranges, tangerines, and even marmalade towards the end of its life expectancy. Now, bottled under a screw cap closure, the perfect closure in our opinion for white wines, you'd expect this wine to live for quite some time in the cellar, perhaps 10 to 15 years. Really great Rieslings can even go for longer than that. The Penfolds Bin 51 Rieslings, we've proven that they can go for up to 20 to 25 years in a cellar. So Riesling, great varietal, particularly good with seafood, anything that suits an aromatic white wine. The other wine I'm introducing today is the Penfolds Canunga Hill Shiraz Cabernet. Canunga Hill is a wine that we've been making as a red since 1976. It's named after a famous Penfolds vineyard in the Barossa Valley, the Canunga Hill Vineyard, one of our top vineyards. In fact, Canunga Hill Vineyard today regularly produces fruit that goes into Grange, our flagship Shiraz, and into Bin 707, our flagship Cabernet Sauvignon. The earliest vintage of Canunga Hill, the 76 that I have here, sported fruit from that Canunga Hill vineyard, which at that stage was quite a young vineyard. Today, Canunga Hill is a multi-regional blend. We can source the Shiraz from right across South Australia. We tend to gravitate towards some of the cooler vineyards looking for the Cabernet Sauvignon, of course a varietal that ripens later. You'll note with this particular wine from 76, it was labelled as Clarets, which was a commonly used term on Australian wines up until the mid-1980s, basically denoting a cellar-worthy wine style which would age gracefully with the passage of time. Canunga Hill, even at a relatively modest price point in the Penfolds portfolio, has all the hallmarks of a great Penfolds wine, a wine which will cellar, if carefully put down for it, a number of years. But of course, this is one of the great hallmarks of Penfolds. Our wines are really made with that capability of enduring a long passage of time in the cellar. So what do we get when we blend these two great varietals together? So we have the Canunga Hill Retro wine here, which was first released in 2006, and of course you can see the similarities, a homage to the original. And the regular Canunga Hill with the white label. Both Shiraz Cabernet blends, dominant with Shiraz, about 70% Shiraz, 30% Cabernet Sauvignon. Shiraz, or Syrah as it's known in other parts of the world, is a very generous grape varietal, typically a lot of mid-palate weight, very buoyant. In fact, it can be a very exuberant grape varietal and needs to be handled with some restraint, particularly in the vineyard, also in the winery. We find in Australia that by blending Cabernet Sauvignon with Shiraz, we can somewhat temper that natural exuberance of the Shiraz grapes, and we can add another dimension to the wine. We can give it aromatic lift. We can introduce Cabernet tannins, which provide a lovely structure for the wine. I often use the analogy that Cabernet Shiraz or Shiraz Cabernet blends are a little bit like a racing car, where the Cabernet Sauvignon provides the chassis and the Shiraz is the engine. And it's exemplified in what we do with Canunga Hill, a wine at a modest price point, which you can comfortably put into a cellar for a decade, and you'll be rewarded for doing that. You'll see a maturation character emerge with time. All the hallmarks of great Penfolds wines. We've proven time and time again with many of the wines in our portfolio that blending these two varietals gives us synergies. Typically, the warmer areas such as the Barossa Valley and McLaren Vale provide the lion's share of that Shiraz, and we go into some of those cooler districts like Coonawarra, Rattenbully, Robe, Hathaway in the Limestone Coast looking for the Cabernet. But we're not restricted. We can still get really good Cabernet out of McLaren Vale and out of the Barossa, perhaps with a little bit more mid-palate generosity. So Canunga Hill, great examples of Penfold wines, and I hope you enjoy tasting them.